Hey everybody, I wanted to comment a little bit on these campus protests. It's a 36 long minute video, so apparently I had more to say than I thought. But you can play it in your car or something and just enjoy the quiet scenes as I share my views on this controversial. Hey everybody, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that's been in the news the last couple days, which are these campus protests over Gaza and the Palestinians in Israel. I'm sure we've all been hearing about this issue the last few weeks, if not for the last 40 or 50 years. Um, and I'm not saying it's not an important issue, but the protests have really gotten extreme. You know, at MIT, they had an encampment there for several weeks that they're going to try to close down. I just saw it today. Columbia University is practically paralyzed, from what I understand. They're going to Zoom classes, online classes. And a lot of these kids just got done with the coronavirus pandemic where they were all on Zoom probably for their first year in high school. So it's sort of, I don't know. I don't mean to sound ominous, but sometimes it feels like academia is falling apart. But it's been certainly rough. The last few days, you know, these protests have spread. Harvard, USC canceled their graduation. I just saw tonight UCLA is having some issues, and the University of Michigan and many others, and it seems to be spreading. And it reminds me a lot of 2020, where you know these protests kind of spread. And you know, at our campus. We had some arrests over the weekend that were quite dramatic, and you may have seen some of the footage of it on the news. There were several professors arrested, 28 people, and a lot of people from the campus, but also some people from the outside came in. I guess it was last Thursday morning, and were setting up tents, getting ready to have a big encampment, as it were. And our president told them they could not do that in no uncertain terms. And I guess when they refused to disperse, the police were brought in, and the rest is history, as we say. Really quite a historic event. I'm sure they'll be talking about that in the history of the school for years to come. And I felt sorry for the people who were arrested, and I'm not trying to minimize the issue that was being addressed. I support the state of Israel, by the way. I always have, although I sometimes think it seems like the tail wagging the dog in terms of at least some of our foreign policy discussions. But nonetheless, I do support Israel. And anytime you see some language that seems to veer into what I would regard as anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic kinds of language, of course, that's always, something that to be very wary of. But I felt sorry for our president in a way, and I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit. You know, I guess I'm not spilling the beans. I think it's been in the media. He's going to receive a no or a vote of confidence or no confidence. I don't even think I've ever been privy to one of those. That's kind of a big deal when people vote, give you a no confidence vote. And, there was a faculty meeting last week, and it sounded like it was not going to go well for him. But I might be one of the relatively few people. If it's even 10%, I'll be surprised. But I'm going to say that he was in a tough spot, and you just cannot have an encampment of people on campus. You know, the where I teach, I actually teach at a smaller part of the school, but our campus and the main campus in the city of Atlanta is just beautiful. It's got to be some of the most beautiful real estate in the state of Georgia, if not in the entire country. I'm sure it's a great place to protest. You know, it beats the hell out of some of these city parks that are full of homelessness, crime, litter, drugs, poverty, depressing, kind of bleak old swing sets, and a few vagrants running around. It probably is a pretty great place to protest at a big fancy university that's kind of pristine and still a virgin, as it were, hasn't been all screwed up yet in terms of its facilities and grounds. But I felt sorry for our president, because you really cannot have that. I mean, we're going into finals week and commencement, and you really want to have a big camp of people. And the one of the comments the president made was that a lot of these people were from off campus, and he was accused of being dishonest. Although there were some from off campus, but don't kid yourself. There are people that definitely go to a lot of these protests. I mean, it's not you're not some kind of a conspiracy theorist if you realize, man, a lot of these people, at least some people, they do, kind of go around to these protests. Some of them have gotten pretty good at it, I guess, especially since 2020. But, and there definitely were some people from other schools and other places there. So then you have the issue of you're not even that sure who's in the tents. They've got all these tents on your quad where people are, going to class, and you have, 18 and 19-year-old students walking around. By the way, I don't even know. I guess these camps, it would be like a camp, right? Like, I guess they would sleep there and everything, and who knows how long they'd be there. Of course, this is pretty great. You've got a food court nearby. You can probably cater in food. I mean, like I said, it's probably a hell of a lot better place to have a big old protest party than the local parks, which are full of homelessness, crime, drugs, prostitution, all those kinds of issues. We run a school. It's an academic institution. We're not a seminary for social justice warriors, and people have to, and I've always thought if you have a thought about something, you should write an essay about it. You should, debate about it. I've never been much for closing buildings, occupying buildings. When I was in graduate school, there was an occupation of the administration building that took about 3 days, and I remember that, which seems kind of small in comparison to some of what we've been seeing lately, but it was a big deal at the time. And I was just thinking back at some of the protests that I have in my memory banks just from my life. I'm 63 years old, so I made a little list of some of the protests I remembered, and this is just tipping the iceberg. Okay, the Vietnam War. When I was a kid, there was the Vietnam War, and I remember I was too little to serve, but I definitely remember the Vietnam War. And then I kind of grew up as a teenager in the 70s when, that was still in a lot of the music and the culture, still kind of a hippie culture. In fact, I'm probably more of a hippie than almost any of those protesters out there. But one thing I don't really like from the hippie period is all that protesting. I think, you'd be better off writing a song or, like I said, writing an essay or a paper or something if you feel that strongly about an issue. And I think that hopefully can have more of a lasting and constructive impact. But, you had here's my little list. You had the Vietnam War, Save the Whales. That was always a good one, right? Even the Partridge Family had a song back then about Save the Whales. Decriminalize marijuana. That was always a good one. I've always supported that. I remember they had the Hash Bash at the University of Michigan and other kinds of events. No Nukes. I remember that. They had the No Nukes concert. Free Nelson Mandela. Boy, that was a big one in the 80s. Save the Sea Turtles. I remember that. Some of those PETA people can get pretty radical. When I was in graduate school, some of the PETA people burned up some labs. And here where I teach now, they have the Yerkes Primate Center, and that was bombed several years back. So some of these people for animal rights can be quite radical. Fur, I remember when people were throwing red paint at women when they came to the Grammys or the Oscars or the Academy Awards, whichever one, but they would go there in a fur coat and get these PETA activists would throw red paint on them. The World Trade Organization, now that was a good 20 years ago, but like the World Trade Organization would have these big summits, and they originally were having them in places like Italy or big cities, and then they had to move them way up high in the mountains, like somewhere up in the Rocky Mountains or the Alps, because these protesters would just shut down the whole city, and quite effectively. A lot of that was well organized. Like I said, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist. Some of these people are pretty well organized and they know what they're doing. And that was another example. I remember reading about those World Trade Organization protests where it was cell phones were pretty new at that time, and they were talking about how the organizers used cell phones to communicate. This is probably the late '90s, and I remember I wasn't that familiar with cell phones at the time, and I remember being kind of struck by that technological image. Here's some more protests I remember. Change the Georgia flag. We used to have a Confederate flag on our flag. One thing about that old flag that we had that was changed in 2001, when that was changed, people swore up and down that, oh no, this was not trying to erase Southern culture. It would never mean that we were going to try to take down Confederate monuments. I think they even wrote that into the law that changed the Georgia flag from the one we had when I moved here to the one that is currently there, which I think that was 2001 when they changed that flag. And they wrote right in the law, we will never move Confederate monuments. But that was worth about the paper it was printed on. Of course, we're still fighting over a lot of those monuments. But there were big protests. Here was another one, fight AIDS, not Arabs. I remember during the first Persian Gulf War, that was a big cheer, fight AIDS, not Arabs. Here was another one I remember, kind of painful to me. I've never gotten over this one. It's sort of been a subtext of my professional life. The Stanford University protest, hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go. I think that was led by Jesse Jackson. And sure enough, they got rid of their old Western Civ requirement, and even the course itself, not too long after that march, Western Civ has got to go. I wouldn't say academically they're better off for it, in my own opinion, although I'm sure opinions vary. But that's a pretty weird feeling when you teach Western Civ and you see hundreds of people sitting there cheering to have what you teach removed from a university. Here was another protest, Take Back the Night. That was a feminist protest. That was one of my first encounters I ever had with pretty radical feminists, not just kind of people who supported equality or something, but some of them were kind of radical feminists, And let me just make sure I still have this. And I remember the ones they had back like in the late 80s and early 90s, they wouldn't let any men into the march. So it was just strictly women. And I think they used to spell women with a Y, WOMYN. Another one, Forsyth County, Georgia. Oprah Winfrey, there was a big march through Forsyth County, Georgia. March for Our Lives, I think that's one I remember about gun control. The Million Man March with Louis Farrakhan, the Million Woman March. Then there was always the ever popular, was that the pink pussy hats? Was that when Donald Trump was elected? Everybody had the pink pussy hat. All the women had a pink pussy hat. I always thought, congratulations, you managed to make a woman's sexual anatomy repulsive to a lot of men, which actually takes some doing if you think about it. I think they quit using those pink pussy hats, but I think it kind of set the tone. You wonder, is that really supposed to be serious? People, I'm not that serious of a person in a lot of ways. I'm flippant and can make a lot of jokes, but but sometimes you do need to be serious about some things when you wear that kind of crazy attire. All kinds of protests about changing the names of sports teams. So those go way back, and I guess you could take that right back to Henry David Thoreau, the tradition of civil obedience. I find it really scary in these recent days when we see people throwing paint at John Constable paintings, Van Gogh paintings, wasn't Da Vinci, and so many others, or stopping traffic. I'm sorry, stopping traffic is not okay. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, even though it's wrong, very few people in the media will ever say that's okay to stop traffic, but they will tell you, oh, don't fight back or something. But, that at some point is a self-defense measure. If you're in a car and someone's impeding your movement, it is, in effect, kidnapping. You are being kidnapped because you're being told you can't go somewhere where you need to go. And that is, in fact, a type of kidnapping. And that's a very scary tactic. and the fact that it's become more common and maybe effective. I mean, if nobody does anything, then it's effective, right? I mean, so people say, well, everyone got really pissed about it, but it seemed to work. I mean, nothing really happened to us, so let's go for it. But some of these tactics, I think, have grown more radical in the last few years, and I think especially the election of Donald Trump. I don't know, and I'm not commenting on Trump. Some of you might like him, some of you might not. Um, Arguably the country went, well, we didn't have as much chaos when he was president, other than the fact that everybody had their hair on fire all the time. That was where the chaos came from. But man, ever since 2015, it's just been one hysterical issue after another. I mean, we just got over coronavirus, George Floyd. I can't even think of all the issues, but even just in the last year or two, climate change. Oh my gosh, it's just been one thing after another. And now we have this war in Gaza. And like I said, I'm not necessarily commenting on that war. I read about it I try to keep up. I guess if you feel that strongly about it, you should go fight over there. That might sound kind of like some kind of a cheap shot or some kind of a rhetorical point, but it's actually true. If you feel that strongly about it, you should go over there and fight. Same with Ukraine. But a lot of these colleges, people are paying $90,000, $100,000 to be there. You think about it. I think some of these colleges are really going to damage themselves. And in a lot of ways, in my opinion, they're already damaged compared to what they were 30 years ago when I got there, just in terms of their curriculum and their offerings, and things like that. But they still had a lot of prestige in the culture. But I don't know. I think this is going to really hurt a lot of colleges if they don't stop it. They'll just look at what happened in Seattle and Portland. Remember that mayor of Seattle said, "Oh, we just might have a summer of love." Tee hee hee. She kind of giggled about it. And when I was a kid, Seattle was always kind of one of the most beautiful cities. I've never been there, but I remember that show, "The Bluest Skies You Ever Seen Are in Seattle." Bobby Sherman sang that song, if I'm not mistaken. The old teen, my sister used to like Bobby Sherman, but it was always, blue skies, kind of the West, this really clean kind of northwestern city. Same with Portland. And I even remember when I first started teaching, people would apply for jobs out in Portland or Seattle or in those areas, Northern California too, but they would always just say, "Man, it's like going back to the 50s. It's just like there's hardly any divorce. There's not a lot of rich people, but there's just these big, stable, middle-class communities and a lot of nice schools, and you didn't have to live in some $1.6 million home to send your kid to a decent school. The neighborhood schools were all nice. And now when I look at it, it looks like a war zone. It's hard to tell from the news, but it certainly doesn't seem like what it used to be, Portland in particular. But I remember that mayor of Portland, we might have a summer of love. She just let all those protesters take over that city. And look, they did. There was arson, there was vandalism, and don't kid yourself. That could happen at a college too. If you have a big camp of hundreds of people there, and they cannot, and you can't get rid of them, and the minute you touch one of them, they go police brutality. So you end up, I can't really do it. That's kind of the problem with the police today. They're so afraid to do anything because they get so criticized, if not thrown in prison, if they do anything. So they just kind of throw up their hands. And meanwhile, these communities go down the tubes. These institutions go down the tubes. I sort of feel like that happened some in 2020. Like I said, I've never been to Seattle or Portland, but that's just sort of my impression. But I was thinking, why that could happen on a college campus. You get these beautiful campuses that are still kind of leafy. Probably a lot nicer to be at a protest at a nice campus. You've got food courts, a bunch of rich, naive, people that are sort of always trying to be patronizing to the poor and the needy, which is good. I'm not saying that's bad, but you get a bunch of them, and they're always kind of supportive of whatever you do, and in a sort of a condescending way, I might add. But don't kid yourself. You get some big camp with hundreds of people out there in the middle of a quad of a university that's dedicated to academics and learning. That could be a big disaster. You think, who's going to want to go to a school like that if you have some protest camp out there for the next 6 months, and place would probably start to stink and litter, and I guess they figured all the campus securities probably was going to be expected to clean up after them all the time. It's just, I mean, I don't think it was an easy decision, but I could see why a university president would say, not while I'm here. You can yell at me, you can say what you want, but we're not going to have a camp out in the middle of our quad for God knows how long. And once it's there, it's hard to get rid of. It's a lot easier to stop it before it starts. But it was a big mess, and it was painful for me to watch too. But it's it sort of is what it is, and I think that culture of protesting, it's kind of trendy. I'll tell you this, I might not be much of a protester, but if you could plot me down at the age of about 18 or 19 and plot me down back in 1969 or 1970, I'm sure I would have gone to some of those Vietnam protests, if for no other reason that they had the best parties and the best music. Now, I don't know. I don't know if they have parties and music. Maybe that's what the university president should do. Say, well, you can't sit out there and party in the quad, but you can. We'll let you party and listen to music and have festivals and things, and relax a little bit. But everybody's always got such a big stick up their butt about everything these days. But if you could plot me down in 1970, I think I might enjoy the Vietnam War protest just because of the music and the party, the social scene. I'm never sure, at least some protesting is that, but it's kind of, I don't want to say it's contagious, but I do, you hear, well, there are a couple thousand people out there. Hell, like a couple of those professors that were arrested, they said they just saw all the hubbub and went out there to see what was going on, and then the next thing you know, they're being thrown to the ground. I don't even know what their views on the protest were. For all I know, they're not supportive of a ceasefire. I mean, and they were just out there because once you have that people, it's like a critical mass. It starts to feed on itself. Everybody wants to go, and pretty soon it's kind of mayhem. But I certainly don't think it's inappropriate of the professor or the president of a school to say, we're not going to do that here. We're a university. We're not going to have an actual encampment in the middle of our beautiful quad, which has been paid for by donations and people that love this place. I think a lot of people, they just shit on, they get a hold of stuff and just shit on it. And you think of a school like that, that's been built up for generations by people who loved it and were committed to the mission of the school. And to just have people come say, well, we're going to turn the whole university into some kind of a protest encampment. Well, and by the way, what the hell does our school have to do with Gaza? Like I said, I think what it has to do with Gaza is it's more prestigious, and it works better to protest by taking over a big fancy school that's famous than some local park with a bunch of homeless people. I really think it comes down to that. I also don't really think the divestment issue is fair. When people give their money to the school, most of a school's endowment comes from donations. The people that are in charge of a great school have to run that endowment, and it's not their money, and they have to put that where the money is safe, where it's stable, and where it would produce the best returns. That's just fiduciary responsibility 101. So telling people they shouldn't invest, anything legal should be invested in. And if it's what's the best for that fund in the school, that's a financial thing. So I don't even really agree with divestment. I don't agree with it really in terms of the underlying prejudices about divestment, but I also don't agree with it just as a financial matter. When you in charge of, our school is a charitable organization. It is a 501c3 corporation. People get tax deductions for giving their money to that school. Around where I live, because of the tax code, you have all these little ladies donating their house to the college all the time. I'm sure it's not necessarily because they love the school so much. A lot of them don't have anything to do with the school. It's for tax reasons and inheritance and trust planning. I don't know. But I'm sure they go to a lot of trust planners that'll tell you, well, donate your house to the school, and it'll be better for you in terms of your estate somehow. So, but you have these endowments that are built up with just, they're the size of small countries. But that's not just money to throw around wherever a bunch of people on the quad intense think you should put it. You have to put that where it's safe, stable, and secure, period. And if you don't do that, you're being flippant with one of the most important assets any school has. So I definitely don't agree with this idea of just divest. Maybe we just invest in all these companies that don't make any money. Maybe you just really want to prop up all these companies. Maybe I could see that happening in our financial future, where all these funds for investment, they become sort of socially conscious funds. And of course, you'd have that would skew all the incentives for what kind of businesses people start. It'll probably screw us up pretty bad. So, that's money 101 is you put it where it's safe, steady, and has the best yield. I mean, if you're not doing that, you're not doing your job, period. So I really felt sorry for a president. I think he's going to be taking a lot of heat. I felt sorry for the people that were arrested. Definitely, I like I said, that's the kind of thing you could imagine yourself almost being caught up in that. And I don't necessarily consider myself someone that would be out there protesting, but you can see how you just kind of get caught up in it. But I also can see why the president of a school would say, you know what, we're not going to have a camp in our freaking quad. We're going into finals week. People are taking tests. We're going to have commencement, all these parents here. And that's where they have commencement, by the way. You think they want, maybe, sometimes I think a lot of those protesters are aware of that. So they're, see, like I said, they get a lot of publicity by going to a big, fancy, sort of pristine, virgin area, like a big, fancy school. They could just go to the local park and no one would pay much attention to them. So I don't really think it's fair to our president, myself, although I'm sure he feels bad about what happened too. I doubt, but anytime the police are telling you to do something, it's a tense situation. Look at Eric Garvey, killed for selling a loose cigarette. And it wasn't because he had a loose cigarette. It was because he was resisting arrest or whatever they said it was. I would found that outrageous. And by the way, my solution to that problem was, why is a cigarette illegal? It's because they have all these the health nutsos make all these laws about selling cigarettes. So a pack of cigarettes in New York City costs $15, and then you got some poor working class guy out on the corner selling them for $1 a pop, and he's getting arrested. And I blame the tobacco policy myself. But anyway, when it could be spitting on the sidewalk or jaywalking, but when you're dealing with the cop and you're doing anything other than just cooperating with them, you're really that situation could escalate very quickly. And like I said, I'm not blaming the protesters, and they were arrested. I certainly hope, when I looked at the footage, I did see a kid spit at the cop, But I feel sorry for them. And somebody vandalized, but right away we had vandalism at our school. The beautiful marble buildings, some of the nicest buildings in the whole state. And somebody spray painted "Death to Israel, F America." I'll just say it, fuck America. Let me tell you something. If you say fuck America, fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you if you say fuck America. No, you fuck you is what I say. Fuck you. And to write that on a beautiful building. And then they said Emory University of genocide on one of their other. So yeah, there's vandalism. That's hard to. By the way, that's hard to spray paint. And if somebody spray paints on a building, next thing you know, they're going to light it on fire. You don't. If you think that sounds far fetched, I don't. I don't think that's far fetched at all. And the final thing, when I see some of these protesters and how kind of extreme they can get, it reminded me of The Godfather 2. In The Godfather 2, Michael is trying to do some business. Was it with Haman Roth? I forget the plot of that. It's more complicated than a Norse Icelandic Edda saga, but was it Michael? It's such a great movie. Michael Corleone's trying to do some business in Cuba, some mafia type business in Cuba, and it was in the late 50s under the Batista regime. But Cuba was going through this communist revolution, and everybody else was kind of blowing it off. All these are just these wacky protesters, and there was a bombing or something, and Michael saw it. And of course, we're watching it. That movie came out, 1974? You're watching it, and you're thinking, that's Castro. They're going to take over the island, But everybody in 1959 and 1960 was just saying, well, it's just a bunch of protesters. But I remember Michael, who was so smart, one of the most admirable killing mafia, hardened, murderous criminals ever, but Michael Corleone, it was hard not to like and respect him and admire him. But I remember he looked at that, there was some nut job blowing up a building in Havana, and the guy just said, the guy who was in the car with said, no, that's just some nut job. And Michael backed out of the arrangement because he said, something's going to happen on this island. When you have people that are willing to go to those extremes, they're going to win. That's what Mike. I don't know if you ever watched Godfather 2. He said they're going to win. They're not just nut jobs. They're willing to go to the extremes, even to the point of being suicidal, and they're going to beat you. And sure enough, it was just that movie took place, right around the time of the Cuban Revolution when Castro took over, and but I've always remembered that people kind of write these things off as these anomalies or just sort of a fringe group of the population. And they don't realize that history is full of groups like that have had a very drastic and dramatic effect on countries. And I'm trying to think of one that I would compare to that I saw as having a good effect, and I'm coming up a little dry. Maybe you can help me. Like the Bolsheviks in Russia. No, I'm not going to say they were good. The Jacobins in France, the Red Guard in China, where they, by the way, where they killed all the old professors and all the old ideas. They destroyed 1/3 of the art in China. By the way, if you want to have a protest about something that has to do with foreign policy and influence, instead of picking on Israel, how about the influence of China in our universities, which was definitely massive? And China's a fucked up country. It's a lot worse than the state of Israel. And look at all the influence China has in our universities. I don't see anybody out there protesting to divest from China, to kick all the international students off campus, which I wouldn't either. They're good kids and great students, but you don't see that, do you? But Israel, Emory is a school. It is an academic institution. I know it's an attractive place to protest, both for the physical comfort it might provide, the collegiality, the fun, the mix of people, the services. Like I said, you protested out on the quad there, you probably have the campus staff picking up all your shit getting up every morning and going through. But boy, oh boy, it would sure be a mistake for any school to just let some big camp just set up there indefinitely with some open-ended thing. And and once one of those camps gets going, it's hard to stop. And you can see those incidents that we had Thursday. That was just after an hour or two. Can you imagine after you had a group that was there for weeks, trying to get them to leave, and probably just would keep getting bigger and bigger. You could end up with some protests with thousands of people. Right in the middle of finals week, right in the middle of commencement. And even if it were on summer vacation or something, that's still not an appropriate place to party. I always say this. I think one thing that's wrong with schools today is they need to get the stick out of their butt and be a little more like Animal House, a little bit more like Woodstock, a little bit more get rid of all the dorm rules and the monitoring that they've had since then, and let kids be kids. And it's definitely it should, like I said, if you really feel that strongly about the Middle East, and there are definitely some issues there, write an essay. Do something like that. But don't write "fuck America" on a beautiful marble building. Don't write "death to Israel" on a beautiful marble. How is that helping the situation, by the way? You think that's helping anything? Even if you don't like America, write an essay on why you think we should all fuck America. Go for it. Fuck America, this guy said. Fuck America. Fuck you. Fuck you. I don't like to say that. I'm not saying it lightly. I really mean that. If you say fuck America and write it on a building, no, fuck you. It's exactly what the correct response is. Whether you're Shakespeare or Yogi Berra or whatever, fuck you. If you write fuck America on a building, then fuck you. Well, I spouted off. Thank you. God bless you.
Subject.